Hey everybody, Jason Cutter here with another special guest series on the Authentic Persuasion Show. You know that my mission is to help fill the world with authentic persuaders. And if you're here tuning into the podcast, to the videos, to this show, it's for a reason. The goal of this show is to help build value for you as a sales professional, help you sell more, close more deals, make more money, do it in a way that's authentic. If you're a team leader, a sales manager, any kind of leader, this is for you as well. We're here to help you learn whatever you can to be successful with your team. That's why for today's episode and for this three-part series, super excited to have Mr. Joe Calamusa from the University of Alabama on the show. So he comes at it with 10 years of sales leadership experience before getting into the education side, not necessarily a part of his plan. He is the managing director of the University of Alabama sales program. He is also the founding partner of Sales and Leadership Development Group. His purpose is really to teach and inspire professional fulfillment for college students at the university, as well as corporate students all over the world. You'll learn a lot more about that, like I have, and where his purpose, the vision, and everything that he does and where that lines up for what he's doing for salespeople out there in the world. Joe, welcome to the Authentic Persuasion Show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm grateful for the time and excited about what we have for us.
All right, so you're at the school now, you're teaching now, but give a little bit of your background and your journey, because again, like I mentioned in the intro, you weren't necessarily thinking professional sales education when you were in sales years and years ago.
Yeah, so I started out of school with a company called Sara Lee Foods. Sara Lee at the time was a major consumer packaged goods company outside of just the food space. And so I started in brand management with them and had a chance to learn that category management, brand management business, and then spent 10 years with a company called Pico Foods in sales, national account sales, grocery retailers, Walmart, Albertsons, those national account guys, and then national account food service chains like US Food Service or Cisco Food Service, a couple of the actual chains like Buffalo Wild Wings and or Ruby Tuesdays, those kind of guys. And then a little bit around export as well. And then from there came to the university in a slow transition, but eventually made the way all the way into the university and kind of took off from there.
When you started in sales, what was your thought of sales? What were you taught that sales was? What did you think it involved and required as far as like the sales portion?
I didn't have any exposure to it or education in it. I had a sales class when I was undergrad at Alabama because it was required for the marketing major. And dude came in every day. I'm going to age myself, but it's just true. Dude came in every day and put a VHS tape in a VCR and hit play. And it was some slick, slimy, selly guy teaching you how to be slick, slimy, selly. And so we got through the class. And then when I was at Sara Lee Foods, that's when I started to see the sort of the legitimacy of it, because I would travel as a brand manager from time to time with the sales teams to meet with customers. And I got a chance to see that, you know, what they really did. And that's why when there was a sales opportunity came up, I was interested in it because I enjoyed the marketing side. That's what I went to school for. But there's only so many hours you can spend staring at 3 or 4 different hues of red to decide which hue on the color spectrum is going to be the new Vienna sausage can logo. Business was getting done. Like people were making these multi-million-dollar deals. And that kind of got me a little more exposed to it. And then at Pico Foods, I was around a bunch of people who were elite level sellers who had no sales teaching, no sales training. They didn't read sales books. They just got in it and they were figuring it out. And they were good people, organized, disciplined, understood their product. Pico at the time was a relatively small, still family-held company, and we were all in it together, figuring it out together. And I was fortunate enough to never get negatively affected or fully indoctrinated by the slick, slimy, selly. So I was never around it, and so I never became it. And all I learned how to do was beat it to survive.
I think I almost wrote my book with that title, like the 7 Up, right? So what's interesting with you is that it was school for marketing and branding. You go in as a brand manager. You're not going into sales. Obviously, you're that professor showing you slick, slimy, gross movies about sales so that, I don't know, to just terrify everyone about sales. I don't know. But then you go out there and then you have ride-alongs, you're doing meetings, you're seeing what sales is about. What did you learn about, like, authenticity? Was that a thing then? Because it sounds like it was really not the slick, slimy stuff. Like, it was really what, relationship building and value creation?
I didn't realize it at the time, but I was seeing the transformational revolution towards true insight, data-driven sales. In CPG, selling to national retail chains, when I was at Sara Lee, when I was doing ride-alongs, I was going to national grocery store chains. So again, Walmart, Publix, Albertsons, Kroger, Safeway, those were the guys who were first expecting a data-driven, insight-driven sales experience. So it wasn't, who's taking me to lunch today? It wasn't my buddy that we've been doing business together for 10 years. What do you got for me? It was spreadsheets and data. And so I think that's what interested me, is it wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Why do you think that was so different? Was it just the culture of those organizations, the game that they were playing? Like, why wasn't it happy hours and golf buddies and things like that? I get it. It's data driven, but like, why is that so different than what you might think or expect of other industries that are being sold into?
You have to understand the interchange there. You had the national retail grocers, and they were being sold to by primarily the national or global CPG companies, the P&Gs and the Nestle's and those guys. And Sara Lee was one of those. So those were some of the first companies to have data and want to use it. And the grocery merchandisers and category managers were some of the first ones to use it to make buying decisions. So now it's interesting. You tied to authentic, though, Jason. It was authentic because they didn't allow for any of the junk, the inauthenticity or insincerity. They didn't allow for it. And there's nothing more authentic than data on a spreadsheet. And so it became that because of the industry space I was in. And then secondarily, very briefly to go with it, I know Walmart got a lot of bad publicity when they were first making their push into supercenters and taking over that space, but they were a benevolent force larger than they were a negative force. And here's what I mean. Walmart said, you can't take us to lunch. We're not going to the Masters. We're not going to your Super Bowl game. We're not going hunting with you, because we know that all that stuff costs money, and all that stuff will increase our cost of goods. So we as Walmart are going to beat everybody else that you're taking hunting, because we're going to demand a lower price and then beat them on the shelves. And they darn sure did it. And all the rest of the retailers had to say, oh my gosh, now we have to be authentic in this way. We can't have a bunch of junk going on all the time, because it's inflating the cost of goods, and Walmart's got a lower price on the shelf, and we got to compete with Walmart. And that's just moment in time. It had nothing to do with me. I just caught it at the right moment in time.
So I'm imagining you walking into this meeting and you having the upbringing that you did in sales and then data-driven buyers. What did you see, or what would you hear from the buyer side or in conversations about, let's say, the approach that you had versus others? Because one of the things that happens in sales, depending on how you sell, it will usually like freak buyers out because they're expecting slick, slimy, or self-centered salespeople. And then when you do it a different way, they're like, wait a second, you're not like everyone else. What was that? And how did you leverage that in those meetings?
The good news for even the slick, slimy sellies that were slick, slimy selly at the time, the good news for them was, at the time, Jason, that was still a new way to buy, this sort of insight-driven way to buy. So the merchandisers and category managers and buyers knew the dance, and they would suffer the dance a little bit as long as they got to the data. So they would suffer some selly person talking about the weather or some picture on the wall behind the person, or who won the ball game last night, or all that nonsense. they would suffer it for a minute as long as you got to the data. But then somebody like me and us would come in, and that buyer would not have to suffer all that junk because I didn't know how to talk about the ball game or what was on their picture behind the thing. I just had some graphs and charts and a product. And so I think for them, we were seen as maybe more efficient because they didn't have to deal with all the junk and do the dance.
Makes sense. So one of the things that's fascinating, and you know this because you're teaching it and you're seeing it, is that everybody's different, right? So there's some buyers that they want to cut straight to it. Maybe they want the data and they don't want the dance. And then there's others that might want some dance or might need warming up a little bit. Did you see that? Did you have to pivot? How did you do that authentically? Because I'm just imagining like one size fits all approach will work for some and alienate others.
I would say to you, every year that goes by, the buying process becomes more authentic, more transparent, almost more sterile even. But there's always going to be people of certain communication styles that need a different tone or a different tempo. So you have to be able to do all the tones and tempos. More often than not, you're starting from the sterile place and then moving toward that if you need to. That's healthy. And you have to have breadth of interest and breadth of knowledge to be able to maybe pivot to a sports topic. I've got a partner I work with now that you pay a tax. Every meeting you have with them, there's a 3-minute tax. And the tax you pay is the college football tax. So you got to talk about recruiting season or who the quarterback's going to be. And I don't know. I know enough to pay that tax. I can't go. If they tried to take it from 3 minutes to 30 minutes, I'd be dead after 3.5 minutes. But I can do 3. So you do have to be able to do those things. But the good news is, especially for young sellers coming out of college, the good news is that the base is no longer slick, slimy, selly. The base is no longer weather, travel, show you're watching, sports game thing from last night. That's the outlier. And the base is, what do you got? What do you got that will help me? And even things like the financial crisis and pandemic, those kind of things sped up that process because nobody's got time for all that junk. We got to get things done.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Since you brought up the students and the people that you're teaching and the future of sales, how do they resonate with that thought, the principles of authenticity that you're teaching, and then also the here's what sales is now versus the happy hours and the talking about the big game versus just getting to solutions?
The way we present it is it's the cross that we have to carry. Again, I went to work in an area where the buyers were buyers, but most selling is done where the buyer isn't a buyer. The buyer is a small business owner or a department head or whatever. And so the cross we have to carry is that those folks who are not buyers by trade still may have this perception of slick, slimy, selly, and it's not their fault. They're not prejudiced or biased or bad people. They've probably been called on by 100 slick, slimy sellies, whether it be blast emails or drop-bys or whatever, in the last 90 days. And so you're carrying that cross for the generations of slick, slimy, selly that did what they did to your role, your position as a seller. But the wonderful news is that once they realize that we are not everybody else, that cross becomes our salvation because it allows us to say, okay, now I'm not that. And by me not being that, I'm automatically in a better position than somebody else who is that. Now, being agile, tone, tempo, lens, language, if somebody wants me to be a certain thing, more charismatic, I'll be more charismatic. If you want me to be more relational, I'll be relational. I don't care. I got a goal. I got a number to hit. But the good news for the students is that they understand they don't have to be that caricature. The problem is there are some that come from that caricature, that are that caricature, that they enter an intro level sales class and they say, I should have to take this class because, my mom and dad and grandparents, they were all in sales and I can sell whatever to whoever. And I'm extroverted and I can talk to anybody. The problem with them is I got to break them down to nothing and then build them back up. But the vast majority are not that. That's 1 in 100. The vast majority are like, I don't like this sales class. This freaks me out. And then it takes you about a month to let them know, this ain't that, bro. This ain't that. You can do this. And they come.
And what's interesting, and it brings to mind when you're talking about the cross to bear for all the other people that have been trying to sell to that individual, right? That non-professional buyer is the one piece of advice I give to everyone in sales, especially if they're new or they're struggling, is just do the opposite of what you think a salesperson should do. Because in their mind, they have this thing that salespeople should do. What you're talking about in that third generation extroverted, charismatic, selling sand in the desert kind of person, where it's like everyone else, just do the opposite of what you think you're supposed to do in sales, and you will set yourself apart and find greater success just by doing that.
I don't let that get out too much, because then my class, you wouldn't need to take my class. Like, I should just show up in the first day and, hey, here's the syllabus. Do everything the opposite of what you think a salesperson does, because that's all I'm going to teach you to do for the next 15 weeks anyway.
Obviously, all of the nuances. Okay, then now what do I do? Because one of the things, like, and this is in my book, but if you do everything the opposite of what you think a salesperson should do, you might end up like an order taker, because then you're just sitting around waiting for people to buy. And so they obviously need people like you in your class. So don't worry. If they think they can do it on their own, like reading a book and watching a YouTube video, they're like, you and I both know, they're not your students or your clients. So how does that resonate with the students, the non-third generational salesy person? But like, how do they take that when you're having those conversations? You said it takes them maybe a month to get through to them of what it is. Like, do they want that in sales, or are they marketing people who are forced to take a class? What does that dynamic look like?
The minor that we have at Alabama in sales, and is a minor, is the largest minor in the business school by quite a bit. And very few of the members of the minor declare the minor before they take the intro level sales class. So there are very few of our minors who are committing their college life to sales before the classes start as a freshman or something. So what happens is they get in the class largely because, you said it well, largely because it's required for their marketing major. Although now we're so mature that it may be word of mouth and people from other majors across campus and heard about the class, and my brother took it, my sister took it, whatever. Anyway, most of our minors come from converting them when they're in the intro level class. So the majority of our minors choose to take additional sales classes, 3 more classes, after or during the taking of the intro level class. So what does that mean? You're converting them while they're in the class, which means they receive well with relief, and then maybe first relief probably, and then excitement, what they're doing. And they can see, maybe this is something I can do. And it probably helps that we have 50 companies coming in and out of there every class period to talk to them about all the jobs and internships and great things you can do. But still, they're being converted in the class. So I can't comment on the individualized thought processes because there's so many of them, but I can give you the data. The data backs it up that they weren't going to take more sales classes when they showed up because of their perception of sales. They were in class, and now they're going to take 3 more sales classes when they're done with the class because of what they learned about what sales really is in the class, and did 6 role plays. But we're so far away from slick, slimy selling, you can't see slick, slimy selling from our role plays.
I know in the part 2, when we talk about persuasion, the process, I want to talk more about those role plays, more about the values and the purpose and everything that you have related to it. Final question for this part on authenticity, but from the buyer's side, right? There's the data-driven buyers, the professional buyers, then there's everyone else. What do you think buyers want from a salesperson that they will actually want to work with?
The number one thing that they need is depth of knowledge about what the person is selling. So the single most important thing in mind as a seller is having authoritative knowledge, like being an authority on the subject of whatever it is you're selling, okay? It's the entry fee, all right? So they expect that you are an expert at whatever you are there to present or provide. That's one. And then two, and this is really connected to what you teach and preach and what you do, is they are required, the product knowledge is the entry fee, but empathy empowers that product knowledge. So I've got to make a genuine, authentic, to use your term, an authentic intention, show an authentic intention to learn of the lens and language of the person I'm selling to, their challenges, their changes, their opportunities, their needs, their processes, their principles, their priorities, whatever it is. And so that now I can take this largely general product knowledge and customize it or personalize it, reposition it even to this buyer who's not really a buyer. And I think that's the biggest deal. If you're a professional buyer, I need less empathy. If you're not a professional buyer, I need more empathy.
Interesting. I love it. And it's so fascinating to think about that. And of course, what's really interesting is to think about your students coming in, and what I've learned about them, and only been in the classroom a few times, is before they got in there, they think they know what sales is, and it's transactionals and it's cars or watching their parents buy real estate or them buying a cell phone or a couch or something like that. They don't realize this whole world and how dynamic and complex professional sales is. That's a perfect place for us to stop, because we're going to talk about the science of it next in the persuasion piece. So for people who want to find out more, connect with you online. You're on LinkedIn, Joe Calamusa, Calamusa. They can find you on there. We will have the links in the show notes. They can also find the program. So University of Alabama, obviously someone smart got a nice URL for that. It's uasalesprogram.com instead of the standard format of a university's program link. So that will be in the show notes. Joe, thank you for being here on part one. I can't wait for part two, but I appreciate what you're doing in the world of helping these students on the authentic side. All right, until part two, please make sure to tune in, everybody. But that's it for this part of our conversation. We're going to talk about persuasion next. We also have the future of sales part three. For if you're tuning in and a part of this journey, I appreciate it, because it's part of my mission. It's why I bring people like Joe on here to help shift the world of sales from what it seems like is this gross, dirty word and something you want to avoid because you don't want to deal with a slick, slimy salesperson, as he was talking about, but shifting it into something where it's respectable and you actually seek out a professional salesperson because you want the help. And so this program is a part of that. And thank you for being here on that journey and for helping fill the world with authentic persuaders.